Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the very first edition of All Access AM with Billy Embody. Thanks for tuning in. I'm really excited about this show that we are debuting with you guys on this Tuesday, October 14th, 2025. We've got a jam-packed show for you guys today talking about the ACC. That's what we're going to do here for the most part on this show. It's going to be ACC driven. We're also going to touch on general college football, basketball topics as they come up and as we want to. That's the cool thing about this show. We're going to be live 3 days a week. Moving forward, it's going to be Mondays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Central Time. Maybe we expand one day. Maybe we add an hour here or there as this thing grows. But we're really excited to get this off the ground and moving with you guys on this Tuesday. Had to get the stream all situated and ready to go. And we've got two great guests for you guys at 7:30 Central Time. Pete Nakos is going to join us on 3, is going to be heavily involved on this show, of course. That is where you can find my work at ontheponyexpress.com. And also from on 3, Brett McMurphy, two of the biggest newsbreakers right now in college athletics, are going to join us at 7:30 with Pete. And then right after him, Brett McMurphy at 7:45 a.m. to kind of close out this show. But I want to get into a little bit of what we're going to share with you guys on this show, not just from the initial one, as I'll kind of try to introduce myself to a lot of you guys who don't follow me from the SMU beat, but also we're going to get into what we're going to do down the line as well. So we've got a lot of big plans for this show, but the goal is to really have this be a lot of viewer and YouTube subscriber driven, Twitter, crew out there as well. There's a lot of great ACC fan bases, and we want to try our best to cover it all. We've got 3 days right now, a week to do it in football season. That's plenty. And I think for us, we want to bring you guys the guests. We'll have Larry Williams with Tigers Illustrated on later this week. We'll also have Chad Bishop, who covers Georgia Tech, on later this week. And those guys have 2 big games to cover as Clemson hosts SMU, and also Georgia Tech faces off with Duke in a massive game for the ACC. So we're going to build this thing from the ground up. There might be days that you'll hear a lot more of me than other days, and then there will be other days where we get a bunch of guests on to share their opinions and knowledge on the ACC and how things are transpiring. And of course, once we get into college basketball season, that's where the ACC's blue bloods, of course, will take center stage, but also the teams that make noise, and we'll do our best to cover it all. So this is a really exciting venture for me to kind of get off the ground here and start out with this first episode. We hope to become a part of your morning routine. And one day, let's be real, you want to be 5 days a week in the morning. That's maybe is what happens with us. But for now, we thought 3 days would be a great first starting point for this show. So you could follow me on Twitter at Billy Embody, Embody. I've covered SMU for the past decade plus at various stops at scout.com, 24/7 Sports, and now on 3. And I've also covered the SEC for almost a decade now. So really appreciate all the people who have stood by me and supported me as I kind of came to them with this idea. And one of the first people that stuck up for us and stuck their hand up was Security National Bank. They wanted to support us, and we're proud to introduce them as one of our presenting sponsors this week, or for the foreseeable future. But this week we wanted to introduce them, and whether it be personal or business, they can handle whatever you need. They've really become one of the gold standards of caring about family, caring about your actual world rather than just your financial world, and that helps them guide you throughout all the decisions you need to make, whether it be personal, business, wealth management. And so we really appreciate James Landon and the Texas branch and everybody over there for supporting us. So head to securitynational.bank and get started today with them. And you can also find the link in our bio and podcast episode description or YouTube description, wherever you're following us at, to learn more about what Security National Bank can do for you. Do want to say, as we get into this show, we're going to be taking questions from you guys in the comments section. That's something I'm always going to try my best to do, is interact with you guys, whether it be, Cane fans jumping in there, FSU fans, which, for me, I was born and raised in Tampa, so followed all of the Florida programs growing up pretty closely. And it's quite the time in the state of Florida when Miami is ranked number 2 in the country, has a very, very good argument to be the number 1 team in the country. But we're going to cover the entire ACC, like I said, and this is where it gets fun. We'll be able to react because we're going to be live in the morning. So if things happen on press conference days, if things happen during the week with injuries, if things just develop, because that's what they do in this world of sports, they move quickly. We feel like we'll be able to do that for you guys and be there with your drive in. One day we're going to get into doing call-ins, or, maybe leave a voice memo and we'll play it and things like that. So want to do a lot of interaction with you guys and get this thing off the ground. But let's do this. It's mid-season for the most part in college football. Do want to take a look at kind of my thoughts on the ACC as a whole, as you look at a league that is very much wide open, very exciting times with some of the teams that are in the top 25 and kind of making their move in college football right now. Not only the Miamis of the world who have dumped all sorts of resources into piecing together a team. It's not always come together for them, but right now you can't argue with what they're doing down there in Coral Gables with Mario Cristobal. But look, the ACC has 5 undefeated teams in league play right now: Georgia Tech, Virginia, Duke, SMU, and Miami. All of that is going to get sorted out. We'll have one team fall from the undefeated ranks this weekend as Georgia Tech does take on Duke. And that is one where, you've probably got to feel pretty good if you're Brent Key and company. But, Manny Diaz, he coaches himself some defense. If they can keep that thing, lower scoring, that might be kind of the world they want to live in a little bit. I visited over there at Duke for that one last year when SMU ran into a whole bunch of trouble before escaping with a win. And it's quite the place to play when it is packed, I'm sure. And Duke has kind of seen this resurgence under Manny Diaz. They had a great first year and kind of turning things around, and made waves in the offseason with Darian Mensah, moving him in there from Tulane. And now they have themselves at 4-2 overall, 3-0 the ACC. Not a great start in non-conference for Duke, but Georgia Tech, meanwhile, has certainly kept its end of the bargain. I think they're a top 10 team. If you're evaluating teams off of what they've done, Georgia Tech is a top 10 team. And, they're probably getting, knocked down a little bit because of, how they, one of their teams now is Clemson, which is sitting at 3-3 on the year, and not an ideal situation when you were counting on that to kind of be your signature win. It's kind of similar if SMU goes on and goes on a run and finds a way to get, win at Clemson. It's going to be very difficult for SMU to kind of tout that win in a sense, even though it's on the road, because Clemson has really fallen off in such a dramatic way. Now, they did get back-to-back wins this past weekend, or these past 2 weeks, beating Stanford and beating Boston College. So they were able to, and I probably have that wrong now that I think about it, but beating those two teams, the bottom feeders of the ACC, UNC, of course. How can anyone forget UNC? But Boston College and UNC, beating them as badly as they did, they're probably feeling a little bit better now in Clemson, South Carolina, after all of the things that Dabo Swinney has had to endure with these 3 losses early in the season. But look, let's dive into a little bit of kind of power rankings here, looking at where this league stands. I think right now the unquestioned number 1 team in the league is the Miami Hurricanes. Carson Beck has really been able to lead them to such high, aspirations now. There were high expectations going into the season, but I think it's worked out so well for them, just the way they built that roster, and they're playing young guys like Malachi Toney, who just is so much fun to watch. If you haven't watched a Miami game and you start getting a chance to really go into that world of living the world that we do, and kind of scrolling through games and also watching some replays, Malachi Toney is going to be kind of what Zachariah Branch, I feel like, was kind of the hope for when he signed with USC. Ends up transferring to Georgia. He's still dynamic, but Malachi Toney in this offense with Shannon Dawson calling the plays for him has just been awesome. CJ Daniels, former LSU receiver, former Liberty receiver, has really come on strong as well. They've got a crew over there at Miami that, really makes it hard to think that they're not going to be, the ACC champion for sure, but also one of those teams in the college football playoff that go deep. I mean, I think the defensive line that they've been able to put together has just been stellar, and they've continued to wreak havoc with guys like Ruben Bain. It was a lot of fun to watch. Remember when SMU got Ruben Bain's older brother to come GA, and Miami fans kind of crashed out on Twitter there thinking about that. But no, Ruben's having a great season. He's gotten even some Heisman buzz. And when you have that kind of star power in Miami, it kind of feels like everything's right in the world, right? Cam Ward, Xavier Restrepo were kind of that lead group last year, but they didn't have a defense to back it up. They didn't have anything to back up what Cam Ward was doing in his playmaking, and he had to really wear everything, on his own and make all of his own plays. And that's not really where you want your quarterback to be. And that's something where Miami, of course, is trying to avoid that with Carson Beck. And Beck has been just outstanding, the ability for him to manage that offense. And I think Shannon Dawson, this is, even though Cam Ward came into a new system and eventually won the Heisman Trophy, this is a system that I've watched a lot over the years. Shannon Dawson, somebody that I've been familiar with at some of his previous stops, and he has really shown this incredible ability to adapt now to his quarterbacks. And that was something that going into the season I was kind of worried about. I was like, okay, Carson Beck's won, but he's also won where winning is not necessarily easy because it's Georgia and it's in the SEC, but what he had around him as far as the offensive line and kind of the play calling and the scheme, it was somewhat easy to kind of manage and be a game manager. Well, he's kind of turned it on this year. He's still got that game manager tag, I'm sure, but his ability to just make the throws when they need to, be careful with the football in key situations, is really helped them. And Miami is riding high going into the back half of their season because they've laid the groundwork now for this thing to end up being in Charlotte. Obviously coming off of their win over Florida State, they get a bye this week. I will say you don't want, if you're Miami, to have the type of finish to that game that we all saw out there. They finished off the Florida Gators in emphatic fashion, pulling away late in that one. But against Florida State, the Noles were able to come back and make that one a game. And now looking forward, they host they host Louisville, and then they go down then they host Stanford, and then they make the trip over to SMU, and then all the way down from Syracuse come the Orange, who really look like a team that was so predicated on their quarterback right now being Steve Angeli, and you can see why they brought him in, but they are not the same team that they were without him at the helm. And, then you wrap up with NC State, who looks, meh right now, Virginia Tech on the road, and then Pittsburgh on the road. So 2 back-to-back road games. Pitt's kind of seen a little bit of a resurgence with their change at quarterback, but we'll see. So as far as number one in the power rankings, you've got to give it to Miami. My number 2 team, Georgia Tech. I've been high on Georgia Tech for a while. I thought the job Brent Key has been doing there has just been awesome. Just a total attitude change and a program that, just you don't always have to make a splashy hire. You have to make the right hire. And I know if that was just the case, everybody would do it. But with Brent Key, it just made so much sense, being an alum of the school, needing that kind of blue collar mentality to go to work and to find solutions and do all of those things. That's something that he really loves to do. And, when you have somebody that cares that much, that's really important. And, for Brent Key to come in and be that type of a leader for this football program, it's really worked out so well. And so the job he's done has just been unbelievable. And so really like what he's done. They're number 2 in my power rankings. I'm going to try normally to kind of fly through some of the power rankings. I know you can kind of make a whole show out of it. But this is, the first one. So there's also that. Want you guys to know the base layer of kind of what I'm working off of this entire year, as we'll try to update these, throughout the season and kind of give you the latest temperature I've got on the world of the ACC. And some of you will care, some of you guys won't. Then you look at, as far as the power rankings go, I really like Um, a lot of teams here, but you've got to give it to Virginia. 5-1. Their win over FSU now looks a little more interesting, of course, but they've been able to get to 3-0 in conference play now, teeing themselves up well for where they're headed, and they really have a schedule that they've got to, of course, navigate it. And I don't think there's room for error when it comes to Virginia because of maybe the roster they have, as much as they've rebuilt. And Chandler Morris has been a big part of that. We talked with him in ACC Media Days in Charlotte and was just really impressed with him as a whole. But when you think about what he's meant to them and his ability to be a veteran and make the plays when needed, Virginia follows up that FSU win, and they don't fall apart. They go on the road and beat Louisville last weekend. That is so impressive as somebody who's been in that environment at Louisville. It's a really, really tough place to play. And, for Virginia, still kind of a team that's not necessarily used to winning, to do that really stands out to me when evaluating them. And so to have those 2 wins on their resume already, the rest of them, you can look back at them now and kind of say, okay, all right, those are some of the teams that are going to have a really tough time in the ACC, or they were, teams that are, FCS or super lower level of competition there. But, then you've got a non-conference game after the bye. You've had a bye. Now you got Washington State that comes to Virginia, and then you face UNC on the road. Then you go Cal on the road. Then you face off against Wake Forest at home. Then you go to Duke. That's the big one. And then, of course, Virginia Tech after a bye week closes out the season. You get it at home. Look, those last 2 games of the year in particular, and even Wake Forest, who is really given, the last 3 games of Virginia are now getting a lot more interesting as a whole, because you see a team in Virginia that is playing with a lot of confidence, but sustaining it when you're not used to sustaining it is really where that's the hardest thing to do. And you see teams like Miami last year trip up when they had all the talent in the world to win the league. You saw Clemson trip up and still find their way into the championship game, of course. But that was, a team that I think we found out what they ended up really being, which is, kind of a team that, didn't necessarily have these, huge, this ability to win big games. Virginia is showing that a little bit this year, although not on that scale just yet. Now you've got those last 3 games are going to be really difficult for them. How they navigate those, plus they'll be going all the way to Cal the week before that Wake Forest game. The whole month of November for Virginia, a team that's new to this, is going to be one where, it could be all over the place. It's really quite the challenge for these schools to navigate some of this travel, coast to coast. Of course, James Franklin of Penn State, who we'll talk about in just a little bit with Pete Nakos and kind of the fallout from that job, but complained about going, coast to coast to that UCLA game. That's what this world of college football is. That's what it is, and you've got to find a way to do it. Those Virginia kids are smart. They'll find a way to manage it as best they can and go from there. But Virginia is my 3rd ranked team in the ACC Power Rankings. At number 4, I go with SMU. This is an SMU team that is I think maybe finding their identity, and their identity is they're just going to win ugly. We'll find out a lot about that if that holds true this weekend at Clemson. And as they navigate that trip, there's a lot of revenge out there for them. A chance to avenge what happened in the ACC championship game and figure that out. But when you look at this SMU team, they've got a quarterback, and anytime you've got a quarterback, you're able to really kind of trust in yourself, that you're going to have a chance in every single game. And that's what has made SMU so frustrating this year, of course, is that, that Baylor game falls apart. You really need a play late from either side of the ball. You don't get one. That TCU game, you have a lead in the 4th quarter. You don't get one, but you see that ability to be there. That's where SMU needs to find itself now in conference play. So far, they've been able to do that. 2 games against 2 teams that, quite honestly, aren't that great right now. So nothing to really hang your hat on, nothing to really change the opinion of where SMU probably is in the grand scheme of things. This is your prove it game this weekend. friend of the show, Dean Rolski, of course, mentioned that at On the Pony Express this weekend. And that is where the next step is for this team. They proved it last year. They went on the road at Louisville and won. They beat FSU, obviously, early in the year when people really didn't know just how bad it was going to be, but it was already bad. You beat TCU last year. You beat Pitt. You broke Pitt completely, and you beat a pesky Boston College team last year as well. So, and of course, Duke last year. That was a memorable game. They found ways to win, and a lot of the times it was them jumping out ahead early and taking care of business. This year's SMU team kind of been a little sleepy, haven't done much of anything with their opening possessions offensively as of late. They've got to fix that heading into Clemson this weekend, 2:30 p.m. kickoff Central Time on ACC Network. We'll be there covering that one in person as well. But, the thing with SMU is if Kevin Jennings plays like he did the last two games, you're going to have a chance. You're going to have a chance every single week. That's the thing with these teams at the top. They have quarterbacks and they have veteran quarterbacks. And that's what makes the next pick for me really difficult, because as much as I want to just say, hey, I'm going to ride with either a Clemson who's been there or a Miller Moss and Louisville, who I'm not entirely high on as a whole, but he is a vet. I'm going to go with Duke. I think they've been able to, kind of right the ship. They had a couple of ugly losses in non-conference play. And when you have a quarterback who is as highly touted coming in as Darian Mensah, you need him to produce right away. So that's the tough part for Duke fans. You invest all this money, all these big reported contracts that these quarterbacks get nowadays, and Darian Mensah gets one of the top ones. You've got to produce, and they weren't able to do that in non-conference. So now they're staring down the barrel of having to win out, very similar to SMU. But not as bad of some beatdowns, losing 45-19 to Illinois, losing by a touchdown at Tulane. Those are all games that you would have liked a better showing as a whole. But you had a few get right games now. NC State, Syracuse, and Cal. Now is the tough test, 11 a.m. For Duke to take on Georgia Tech, and that's where this Georgia Tech team that plays so hard, that really embodies what their head coach is all about. This is a huge challenge for Duke, and then they get a bye, and then they head on the road to Clemson. And who knows, by that point, Clemson could be on the rise again and riding their momentum, or they could be falling back down to where they kind of are right now, at least going into this weekend. A team that desperately needs kind of a signature win because Clemson will also be coming off of a bye heading into that matchup against Duke. So the power rankings from here on out kind of get quite the shakeup over the course of the next few weeks. That's what things will kind of settle in on. I think for me, I look at Louisville as that next team. I probably should pick Pitt here, but I'm going to go with Louisville. I think they're just a little bit more of a talented roster, but Pitt has really been a team that I think, making the change at quarterback has really helped them, obviously. Starting a true freshman, they were able to, go to Mason Heinschel and get a huge performance out of him, moving away from Eli Holstein. Now they look at their schedule and look, they've already got a loss. A loss so far in this year's ACC puts you behind the 8-ball to make it to Charlotte. But now they face off against Syracuse after taking care of business over Florida State, who has fallen quite the rung since beating Alabama earlier this year. And they've head to Syracuse now, another team that's struggling. So true freshman quarterback going in against Fran Brown. I mean, who knows how it goes up there? But Louisville, a team that is just coming off of that loss to UVA. I think they still made it relatively close, but now heading down for a Friday night game at Miami. That's going to be a fun one. That's another reason why we're making sure that our third show is on Thursdays, because sometimes I'm sure there's going to be Thursday or Friday game to preview as well. So we want to deliver that to you guys and make sure you guys have time to watch it. But Louisville then kind of has a run of games that you feel like they should be in good shape until you get to the middle of November when they finish up with Clemson, SMU, and Kentucky. So a tough stretch for Louisville. I would not be surprised if they ended up falling down the ranks a little bit, but they are certainly a team that has the talent in the roster. And then Pitt's after them in the power rankings right now. That puts them right there at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7. Yeah, Pitt is at 7. And then I'm going to go with Clemson. I think this is another team that, you're going to bet on rosters, and until the really bottom falls out, they're going to be still, given the benefit of the doubt for what they've put together. We'll see. This weekend is one where, last year we saw Clemson lose to Louisville at home. We've seen them, obviously lose to Syracuse this year at home, and Georgia Tech, and this Georgia Tech was on the road, but this whole thing is really kind of in a precarious spot. I feel like for Dabo Swinney, this is where you're either going to find out, okay, are you going to run off a bunch of wins here and kind of get back on the right side of things, at least ahead of that South Carolina game, or do they really need to look at wholesale changes as far as how they do things there in Clemson? I think we've at least established that some things need to change, but do they need to overhaul how they build the roster, how they attack the portal, some of those things for Dabo Swinney? I think Cal up next at number 9 for me, and what they've been able to do, almost to bowl eligibility already. They have quite a lot of work cut out for themselves as well with their schedule. Anytime these Cal and Stanford teams of travel just wears on them, but they do get a chance to host UNC, kind of a get-right game again, late night this weekend, and then head to Virginia Tech, and then host UVA. Louisville, they go on the road for, and then Cal, Stanford, and then they host SMU Thanksgiving weekend. Like what Cal's doing, their quarterback, their true freshman quarterback. It's so funny. I mean, the day and age of what we live in college football, but Jaron Kiwa Sagapatelli, becoming one of the star storylines of the true freshman class this season. Of course, technically a transfer, but he's somebody that is settled in well with that Cal team. For me, the rest of it, you've got to give Wake Forest kind of the nod here. And then I'll go NC State, probably Stanford. I actually think Stanford, having seen them in person this past weekend, pretty tough out. Then Syracuse, then Virginia Tech, and then Florida State, Boston College, and North Carolina. I just think North Carolina is even worse than, having 2 wins on the year. It's really bad down there in Chapel Hill, and I think the bottom could very well fall out here soon. So that is the rundown of the power rankings for the ACC on this initial show, kind of giving you guys my thoughts mid-season as where things stand. But look, really excited for our next guest here. We're going to bring him in, and it is Portal Pete, as he is affectionately known. He's got a couple of different nicknames out there, but it is Pete Nakos of On3. Really excited to bring him in now. And Pete, really excited to have you with us on this Tuesday morning. Thanks for the time, man. How are things?
What's going on, Billy? Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's quite the world of college football that you live in. And for our listeners out there, Pete Nakos does just about everything at On3. Lives in the portal, covers college football. The coaching carousel is already fired up. What's college football season like for you right now, Pete?
I'd say I was working on a story with my coworker Chris Lowe waiting there last night, so it's nonstop. But that's how we like to do it here.
Yeah, you get a little bit of vacation time in there, and we won't keep you too long away. I know the pay by the minute is rolling, but let's lead off with this. We talked about Miami kind of in our power rankings to kick things off, but this Miami roster,
Yep.
You have such a good feel for how a lot of these teams put things together. What's your take on how Miami has been able to put this together and where they've gone under Mario Cristobal?
Yeah, so Mario Cristobal has come in and immediately recruited and brought in portal talent at a very high level. And you look at it, they had the number 5 portal class this past year, brought in 20 transfers, and that was really highlighted by Carson Beck from Georgia, the quarterback who's had a really good start to the season. But it's more than that too. They've consistently recruited at a high level since Mario Cristobal got there. but they've also been funded by the necessary NIL dollars to win at a high level. And you look across the landscape, and you have Ohio State spending in like the 35-40 million range. You got Texas Tech at over 28. I would say that Miami is in the right stratosphere it needs to be to compete for national championships.
And as they put that together, what did they learn that you picked up from behind the scenes on, finding out what was the right fit with some of these players, to kind of correct maybe a little bit what happened last year as far as, just that inconsistency that Miami's faced over the years?
Yeah. So Miami hired a defense coordinator, Corey Heatherman from Minnesota this offseason. That's proven to be a really big hire. You have Ruben Bain, who has about 25 hurries through the start of the season right now. And he's not a transfer, but he's an edge rusher who Miami brought in as a high school recruit and is now really starting to showcase his talent under Corey Heatherman.
And looking across the state of Florida, it is quite a different situation in Gainesville, but also Tallahassee now. FSU starts out with a win over Alabama. People are, all jacked up, down there about how it has, been gotten right really quickly, made the changes, but it's a really difficult world to win week after week. And FSU's, fallen on their third straight ACC loss this season. That loss, those losses date back to last year, of course. But what's the temperature like in Tallahassee right now?
Yeah, so you look at a program that went 2-10 last season and started the season 3-0, but has now lost 3 consecutive games. And that that win to Alabama to open the year really, really kind of signaled like, okay, this is a turning point for Mike Norvell. But now the 3 straight ACC losses. And then you mix it in with the fact, too, that they went 2-10 last season. I'm going to be honest with you, too, Billy. He has a buyout that's north of $50 million. That it sits at about $54 million right now. So there's some very serious conversations going on right now at Florida State. But there are also some financial conversations, too, because trying to move from a coach that, has a buyout over $50 million. I know we saw James Franklin and Penn State just do it, but that's a large financial figure to have to swallow.
And with FSU, this is a roster that you bring in a guy like Tommy Castellanos. And I think when we're talking about Miami and FSU, you could see it go really well bringing in a transfer quarterback, or maybe not what you've expected. And Tommy, I don't think is necessarily the issue down there, but what is your take on the landscape of transfer quarterbacks and how these teams sometimes get married up to them, and the behind the scenes world that goes into that versus maybe what is the right fit? Like Carson Beck has come into Miami and been that settling voice, a guy who's been a championship quarterback, and Tommy's certainly done a lot of good for FSU, but it hasn't come to the level they needed it.
Yeah, the situation with Tommy right now is he had ties to Gus Malzahn, the new offense coordinator, from their time at UCF. And then, in my opinion, I think it's worked mostly for Florida State and Thomas Castellanos. I think it's more of a story about how a lot of, Tommy's weapons around him have not been available. Squirrel White was out against Pitt, and Deuce Robinson exited, and Randy Pittman, the tight end from UCF, who's supposed to be this really big player and part of the passing game has been hit and miss this year. So I think it's at Florida State, you're looking at a program that has done everything to win now in the transfer portal, but you're also looking at a program that, if you continue to only dip in the transfer portal, I think it has some shortcomings in terms of depth.
Let's talk about that transfer portal world that teams are having to live in right now. You have these coaches with these massive buyouts, like college ADs are undefeated at giving them out like candy. But you also have now a world where there's general managers. There's different levels of organization. I talked with Andrew Luck this past weekend. He is running the show at Stanford and whatever is next. And then you have other programs where maybe the GM is alongside the head coach. Some programs, are there any programs out there that don't have a GM really? Not many, but it's a world where how do you balance the going after a new coach and firing and paying all this money, or just improving your operation and your talent acquisition?
Yeah, I think Florida State's a really good example because they They brought in a new offense coordinator, right? Mike Norvell gave up play callings with Gus Malzahn. They fired their defense coordinator and brought in Nebraska defense coordinator Tony White. They spent more money in the transfer portal. And I think the conversations going on right now at Florida State to really try to paint the picture is, donors since that, 12-1, 13-1 season back in 2023, they've been all in on Florida State. And now you're going to have a conversation with how much more do donors want to go all in at Florida State if the, on-field product isn't working out under Mike Norvell.
And, you mentioned the coaching carousel firing up again with James Franklin.
Yep.
That had to have been one of those stories that you'll remember where you were when you got that call, or the On3 team got the call that things were heating up, because you guys were out ahead of that one too.
Yeah. From talking to sources the last few days, it sounds like that UCLA loss really put some things in motion, maybe even more than, we thought at the time, just because you kind of assume going on that West Coast trip, maybe having a couple injuries after that big emotional game against Oregon for the whiteout, you would think, okay, they're going to bounce back after that UCLA loss, and then things just didn't go like that. So, I also think James Franklin's AP top 25 record at Penn State played a role in that. I believe it was something like 4-21 during his time in Happy Valley against top 25 teams. So things like that led up to it, but I'd say it really ramped up in the last, 2-3 weeks.
Where do they go? I know Manny Diaz it was at least mentioned as somebody with some natural ties there. Of course, Matt Rule's getting a lot of buzz, but what's your early read on that, and maybe any ACC impact for this job?
Yeah, so the only direct ACC impact I would anticipate right now is if Manny Diaz, becomes the top target. And from speaking to sources in like the first 48 hours of the search, it's really clear that Matt Rule and Curt Cignetti are at the top of the board. Matt Rule was at Temple with Pat Kraft, the athletic director at Penn State, and then obviously what Curt Cignetti's done in 2 seasons at Indiana, he's proven he can win at James Madison, at Elon, and he's only lost 2 games at Indiana, and they're to Ohio State and Notre Dame last year, and they played for the national title.
And the coaching carousel doesn't stop with the ACC, though. Of course, Virginia Tech looking for a new coach. Brent Pry out after his run. They've said that they're going to invest all this money. I don't know where they're getting it. What's kind of your read there? Of course, as Virginia Tech is at least motivated, they seem like a booster base in a athletics department that is trying to play catch up in this new world of college athletics.
Yeah. So, athletic director like Whit Babcock this summer kind of, talked to the board of trustees at a meeting and said, hey, we have that $122 million athletics budget. We need to be closer to 229 at the end of the day if we're really going to compete. So in recent weeks, they've made a new, about, I believe, a $50 million commitment for the 26-27 fiscal year. And then on top of that, too, I think Virginia Tech is one of those jobs open right now that people are trying to, kind of sort out in their head where it ranks. I would say it's probably in the upper echelon from just speaking with, industry sources, if you will. I think that the big attractive points there is the history of winning under Frank Beamer. At the same time, though, like any other job right now, there's big questions about what commitment looks like in NIL and rev share. And Virginia Tech has committed all $20.5 million that they can in rev share this year. But that's going to be when candidates go and sit down, they're going to be asking, okay, what can we do beyond revenue sharing to put a roster together?
Any chance Shane Beamer gets involved with that one?
Listen, I know a lot of people, when we put out our initial hot port, that was shot down by some people. I'm not ready to shoot it down just yet. And the reason why is I think that Shane's trying to win some football games right now. And I think he'll, seriously sit down at the end of the year and consider it all. All that said, though, too, I know Shane's really happy at South Carolina. It's gonna be a big, big surprise if he does take the Virginia Tech job.
It would be quite the story to end up, coaching where your dad, became a legend. Maybe a little difficult. I don't know if that would weigh into that at all, but I know they'd certainly like him back there at Virginia Tech. Let's end on this, of course, NIL and the rev share world that college football is in right now. Pete, what is the latest kind of 50,000 foot view of where things stand with like the rev share, the house settlement. Some people haven't signed some of these agreements, as far as the conferences and schools. Are we in for another potential shakeup here?
Yeah, so I think the best way to explain it to your audience is, so the house settlement was approved this summer. Athletes can now make revenue sharing dollars from universities, things like that. But as also part of the settlement was, they established the College Sports Commission, which has established this NIL Go clearinghouse, and every deal that isn't revenue sharing basically has to be put through the clearinghouse that's over $600. That has not worked out perfectly. There is a lot of frustration among NIL collectives who really, fund a lot of these deals that aren't revenue sharing. And then beyond that too, you have a situation where not every conference has signed the paperwork that was expected to be signed, that they would need to, abide by the College Sports Commission NIL Go. So, I think if I could only use a couple words here, Billy, it'd be called like hectic and still kind of, a mess and things like that.
Next year, because so many teams front loaded their rosters this year, do you see the market kind of taking one step if all things stay the same, do you see the market kind of taking one step in the right direction as far as settling into the new world, and then 27 would be there's no front loading, at least in the certain ways that you could probably think about it?
Yeah, so front loading was when team college football programs, before revenue sharing started this summer, it was like a last ditch effort for a lot of schools to put dollars into football programs. Texas Tech did it at the highest level, and they spent over like $28 million on this year's roster. I think we're going to have some programs who spent a lot of money on this year's roster and might have to pull back a little. And there's also going to be a handful of programs, from what I've heard, that maybe didn't front load the most, didn't put all rev share dollars necessary in. Could there be some rolling over of the dollars into next year's roster, things like that?
It's going to be interesting. Pete, we know you will have it all covered at On3 Sports and Rivals.com. Make sure you guys give Pete a follow out there at Pete Nakos. One of the best follows on Twitter for all the things college football. I mean, I've got him on alert, Pete Nakos _. So, Pete, really appreciate your time this morning. Thanks for waking up with us on All Access AM.
Thanks, man. Thanks, Bill.
All right, there he goes. Pete Nakos headed out for a busy day of work, as he will get right back at it. If you don't subscribe to ontheponyexpress.com for just $1, that's where you could find my written work. You would know that you can also get Pete Nakos there. And, of course, our next guest, Brett McMurphy, an industry legend, one of the top newsbreakers for the last couple decades in the world, is also at On3. We've got a great national crew of Brett McMurphy, Pete Nakos. You've got Ross Dellinger contributing. We'll have Ross on the show at some point, and we've just got a great team at On3 that continue to deliver it all. And before we get to our next guest, Brett McMurphy, do want to remind you guys that you can shop all your ACC footballs at biggameusa.com. Use code BEON325 for 10% off your order. That is the name of the game to get these for your favorite ACC fan. That's BEON325 for 10% off your order and get free shipping. These are the official footballs of the ACC, and we are really officially excited to welcome, for the first time on the show, Brett McMurphy joining us now. And Brett, really excited to have you on. Thanks for some time this morning. And how are things in your world?
Hey, Billy, good to talk to you. Yeah, busy as ever. I remember the good old days, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, when NFL coaches would actually get fired in season before any college coaches. But yeah, that's the good old days. That doesn't happen anymore.
No, it doesn't. And this coaching carousel heating up, what is your take on it? Because this is, trending to be one of the craziest and seemingly most aggressive that we've seen in a minute now.
Yeah, I think, what are we at? We're at 7 openings right now. If you include Stanford, which, announced, before the season that Frank Wright would just be a 1-year stopover until next year. And, there's still going to be more. I mean, Billy Napier, will not return next year. I think that's pretty obvious to everybody unless the Gators win out. Iffy. There's some other potential openings that could happen depending on how teams play down the stretch, some power teams. I think, Billy, one thing that's kind of struck me and probably a lot of people is, the amount of these buyouts is astronomical. And look, I don't have a problem with that. If you could, everyone should be able to make as much money as you can. But, these athletic directors in these universities have basically been taken advantage of, or basically just they're playing a game of poker. They just lost all their money because these agents have been able to get these crazy buyouts and put fear into these athletic departments and ADs and universities that, hey, if you don't make this a big number, somebody could come along and swipe your coach and then he's gone. And so they agree to these deals. And, James Franklin will be getting $48 million. Jimbo Fisher got, close to $80 million. And the schools are crying about not having any money. The Big Ten considering private equity, yet they're willing to toss away, huge amounts of money to hire a new coach. So it's funny. When you need to find the money, you can find the money. But like you said, there's still going to be a lot more moves, I think, before we get to, I was going to say before the end of the year, probably before we get to November.
And do you see any other ACC jobs kind of coming open? Virginia Tech, obviously, one right now. It seems like the league is somewhat in a state of things being okay for the most part with their coaching staffs. I think the ACC is a league that is maybe taking a little bit more of an approach of let's revamp and get a GM in a role, and let's try to make things work that way. Do you see any movement in the rest of the league?
I don't. The only unknown is North Carolina. There's been a billion reports. I'm sorry, 1,000,000,001. A new one just came out. A billion reports on what's going on with Belichick. The truth is somewhere in the middle. So we'll see. Obviously, that's something to keep an eye on. Florida State. That could be a hard conversation. I mean, they're there at 3-3. I think last year was obviously an anomaly for Norvell and Florida State. But now, if you run this back this year, and say you go 6-6 or 5-7, then what happens? Obviously, they've got a big number there if they want to buy out Mike Norvell. I'm not considering they were going to do that, but if how these teams fare in the second half of the season, where some of these coaches you would think, hey, this guy's pretty safe, and then suddenly they, the season starts circling the drain. I think these ADs and these universities have shown, we can't just wait around and hope something happens. We've got to make a change. So I would think, North Carolina and Florida State would probably be the only possibilities. I don't think those are likely. I want to be clear on that, but I think there are possibilities depending on what happens the second half of the season.
Let's talk about this college football playoff race and how the ACC now fully involved with Miami being the number 2 team in the country, arguably the number 1 team. You've spent an incredible amount of time in the state of Florida throughout your career. Let's start with Miami. What they've done to put together the roster that they have, and now finally, seemingly, putting together all of those key wins at the right time to get to this state of their program. What have you heard about that development and how difficult of a task it has been for Mario Cristobal to finally push this, at least from what it seems like, to now where they're going to be perennially in the race for national championship?
Yeah, I mean, I was at the Notre Dame Miami game, the season opener down in Miami, and got to talk to Cristobal, and they're very impressive. And before the season, I thought, that actually Miami would be a better team. I thought the offense would not be as dynamic, not as electric, but I knew the defense would be much better. I mean, it had to be. Last year, their defense was horrific. And I want to apologize to the word horrific for that characterization. But they were just bad. And now the defense is so good that both offensive and defensive lines are among the best in the nation. A lot of that can be attributed to Cristobal's background as an offensive lineman and the importance of being good in the trenches. If you guys haven't seen Ruben Bain, Miami's defensive end, I'm not going to say arguably, because I do believe he is the best defensive player in the country right now. And, the offense has gotten more steady. At the Notre Dame game, I remarked to somebody, I said, Carson Beck's, thrown a number of checkdowns, a lot of short crossing patterns. And this guy from Miami said, we've thrown more checkdowns in the first half against Notre Dame than we did all of last season with Cam Ward. And that's not a shot at Cam Ward. It's just they went, the big risk or reward plays, going deep a lot of times, paid off a lot of times. Sometimes there are a lot of crucial turnovers. And so I think they've been more methodical, if you will, on offense. And, as of now, they, in the past, they've got bit by some big upsets, some dumb play, they lose it. Last year they're set to go to the playoff, and then they lose 2 of their last 3 at Georgia Tech, at Syracuse again when the defense can't stop Syracuse. So it looks like those things have changed. We'll have to see. I think one of the most impressive things about Miami is up until the Florida State game, Florida State's the first team that outgained Miami going back 23 consecutive games. So that's going back into 2023. So, most times, I mean, it's not foolproof, but most times if you have more yardage than your opponent, barring a lot of fluky turnovers, a huge amount of penalties, you're probably going to win most of those games. So I think that's probably what's been most impressive for me. And that win against Notre Dame, some people question Notre Dame out of the gate. They lost, by a total of 4 points to Miami and Texas A&M. That win looks better and better every week. That's why I have Miami number 1 on my AP ballot. But again, we've seen this before. Last year they were, 9-0 till they got to the final 3 weeks. The schedule sets up they should be, 9-0. They should be 12-0. But can they hold on to it? More importantly, Oregon was 13-0 last year, first team to win 13 games in the Big Ten, and they lost in the first round of the playoffs. So it's not going to really matter if they don't have a good run in the playoff.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what makes you have Miami number 1, and who do you see joining them in Charlotte if all of this holds true, or who do you see in Charlotte for the ACC Championship as we hit the midway point here?
I've actually have Georgia Tech projected in my college football playoff field, and that's not. I don't do the if it was held today projections, because that's not a projection. That's a snapshot of right now, which of course it's not going to look like that. So I'm projecting Georgia Tech to get in the playoff. I think they win out within the conference, and then I think they play. Then they finish Georgia, which is a huge game, and then they have the ACC title game. But I think even if Georgia Tech would lose to Georgia and Miami at 11-2, I just think it'd be hard to keep them out. At Duke is going to be a huge test. They're actually a slight underdog. Duke has had its ups and downs, but I just think Georgia Tech. I'm so impressed with what Brent Key's doing there, and obviously Haynes King. I don't know if he's going to have enough big games. Certainly, they don't have any ranked teams left on the schedule other than Georgia. I don't think he's going to get the national attention maybe as some of these other guys, but I certainly think he should be in the Heisman short list if they get to 10-0, 11-0, 12-0, certainly. But I've got Billy. I got Georgia Tech there. Virginia's also got a manageable schedule, but I like Georgia Tech though over Virginia, and then of course Miami's would be the opponent.
Do you think this Heisman Trophy race is going to turn into who's the best quarterback on the best team versus maybe who has these gaudy stats? Because I think of Carson Beck, I think of Haynes King, those type of players right now. I mean, even John Mateer before this past weekend, where they aren't putting up these insane numbers, but they're gritty. They're leading their team to wins. That they're the reason why they're having these resurgences and things like that.
So let me tell you a secret about the Heisman process, and please don't tell anyone. Okay, I trust you.
No one. This was just you and me.
Yeah. So I went to Oklahoma State. So a million years ago, Barry Sanders won the Heisman Trophy. He averaged, whatever his numbers were, it's still an NCAA record for rushing yards per game. That's pretty much the last time statistics have mattered in picking the Heisman Trophy winner. It is a narrative. Who has the narrative? And a lot of what you said is true. Best player on the best team. But again, just think about last year. What did everyone talk about after Travis Hunter's game? Oh, he had 7 catches for 93 yards. He had 3 interceptions. No, it was he played 90 plays today. He could have been horrible in all 90. And look, I voted for Travis Hunter. I thought he deserved it. But again, it's the narrative. And at some point during the season, it's too early. We're just past the halfway mark. At some point, the narrative, you'll start hearing the narratives. You'll see them on Twitter. You'll see different media people, making their pitches and all that. And that will determine, I think, who wins the Heisman. Of course, along with how the individuals are playing. But certainly I think what helps Carson Beck is he comes to Miami. He was, I don't want discarded is not the right word because that's not accurate, but he was, he was apparently not no longer wanted at Georgia, so now he's at Miami. Well, if he leads Miami to their first ever ACC title, that's a pretty good narrative there. And his numbers, aren't going to compare with other guys' numbers. If Fernando Mendoza leads Indiana to 12-0 in the Big Ten title game, that's a pretty good narrative right there. I don't care what his stats are. I don't care who averages more yards passing, yards per attempt, touchdowns, all that stuff. It doesn't matter. It's going to be the narrative. All these stats now, with the way offenses are run, it's all kind of mixed together. I can't tell you who's the leading passer in FBS right now. You could give me 5 guys, and I probably couldn't guess it.
I think it's Sawyer Robertson.
You know what? I read that yesterday. You're right. Yeah. So, okay.
Shout out the Big 12 burners out there.
Yeah. Go Bears. So should he be in New York? Probably not. Baylor's middling around 500. So is that fair or not? I'm not going to say it's fair. You asked me, I'm telling you, that's how the sausage is made. And I voted for the Heisman for a long time. And I kind of have a pretty good idea how to read the other Heisman voters. And, so that's something to keep your eye on. I just tweeted the latest Heisman favorites right now. And Ty Simpson's the favorite right now, but that doesn't mean anything. If Alabama doesn't win, most, if not all their games down the stretch, he doesn't have a shot. So it is a little bit what you said, best player, best team, but also it's a good narrative than of course the cliched Heisman moment where a guy has a great play in one of his final 2 or 3 games.
Well, it's going to be fascinating to watch it all and play out this season. And this feels like one of the most wide open seasons we've watched. I know the playoff obviously expanding to 12 certainly creates a lot more drama and opportunity for teams to do that, but it makes it more, I think, enticing for fans to tune in, of course, and see it all play out.
No, I agree. And I think, I was joking earlier about the good old days 3 or 4 years ago. Heck, just 2 years ago when it was only a 14 playoff, when you were trying to predict the national champion, probably a lot of folks like me would sit there and say, okay, who can win the SEC? Who can win the Big Ten? And kind of narrow it down to that's kind of who my champion pick is going to be. And you nailed it. I mean, it's wide open. There's a dozen teams that have a legitimate shot to win it. I'm not talking about teams that can make the playoff. I'm just saying there's probably 12 to 14 teams that if they get into the tournament, they've got a chance to win it. And just because Miami goes 12-13-0 and wins the ACC, they're not the favorite to win it by any means. We saw what Ohio State did last year. They didn't even win their conference. They didn't even play for the conference title, yet they won the national title. And everything Oregon did in the regular season, didn't mean anything when they got to the playoffs. So that's what's going to be fascinating. No matter what happens the rest of the way, whoever wins the power conferences, once everybody's in, I'd say, I'd realistically, there's probably only about 6 teams I think that can win it, but I don't think it necessarily depends on whether those 6 teams win their conference or not. It's just simply, can you get to 10? Can you get to 11 wins and get into the playoff field? And then it's anybody's game.
Yeah, it really is. We saw that last year. And look, we'll see a lot more of Brett McMurphy at on3.com. You can follow him there. Is at Brett_McMurphy on Twitter. And we will have him back on the show later this year. So Brett McMurphy, thanks so much, man, for stopping by. We really appreciate you kicking off All Access AM with us.
Thanks, Billy. Appreciate it.
There he goes. Brett McMurphy stopping by with us to close out this very first edition of All Access AM. And we appreciate you guys for tuning in with us. Over 300 of you guys watching in some form or fashion. Please hit that subscribe button, hit that follow button, hit that like button. Please support us wherever you're watching us at. You can find us at All Access AM on YouTube as well. If you search that on Google, that's where you can turn on notifications for when we go live in the morning so you don't miss a show. And we will, of course, be back Wednesday morning and Thursday morning with shows as well. We look forward to interacting with you guys in the comments, so make sure you keep that in mind where you're watching on YouTube or wherever. You could respond and ask questions to me on Twitter, and we'll address them as well. So this has been a lot of fun for me to start this, and we'll see where this goes, but we're excited about it. We really appreciate Security National Bank for sponsoring us and getting this off the ground with us. We've got some exciting sponsors to add into the fold as well that we'll reveal later this week as well. So looking forward to all of that and more. This has been All Access AM with Billy Embody. I hope you guys enjoy it, and really excited to get this off the ground. This has been a lot of fun, and thanks so much for the support, everyone. And we'll catch you next time. Thanks for listening.